From Proverbs 15. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouths of fools pour out folly. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. A fool despises his father's instructions, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. In the house of the righteous there is much treasure, but trouble befalls the income of the wicked. The lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the hearts of fools. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is acceptable to him. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he loves him who pursues righteousness. There is severe discipline for him who forsakes the way. Whoever hates reproof will die. A scoffer does not like to be reproved. He will not go to the wise. A glad heart makes a cheerful face, but by sorrow of heart the spirit is crushed. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feeds on folly. All the days of the afflicted are evil, but the cheerful of heart has a continual feast. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. The way of a sluggard is like a hedge of thorns, but the path of the upright is a level highway. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish man despises his mother. Folly is a joy to him who lacks sense, but a man of understanding walks straight ahead. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisers they succeed. To make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good it is. The path of life leads upward for the prudent, that he may turn away from Sheol beneath. The Lord tears down the house of the proud, but maintains the widow's boundaries. The thoughts of the wicked are an abomination to the Lord, but gracious words are pure. Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates bribes will live. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. The light of the eyes rejoices the heart, and good news refreshes the bones. The ear that listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. Whoever ignores instruction despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence. The fear of the Lord is instruction and wisdom, and humility comes before honor. All right, I think it seemed to me that there was a consistent kind of overall theme to this chapter of joy and sorrow, how people who follow a path of wisdom, who listen to discipline and surround themselves with wise people, have a happier life. They are healthier, they are wiser themselves, just things go better for them. And people who follow foolish impulses, who don't listen to instruction, who surround themselves with fools, they're inviting trouble. They cause problems for themselves and just generally have a more miserable life. There are, I think, right in the middle of the chapter, like verses, I think, 13 through about 18, there's this, the wise person is happy. The fool is miserable because he does these things. And the wise person is happy because he does these things. And these verses all seem to be connected and playing off of each other. But before I go off talking anymore, I'd like to hear your thoughts. So in particular, if there's any verse in here that you want to talk about, go ahead and speak up. But in particular, I'd like to hear your thoughts on these 4 questions. What speaks to you? What puzzles you? What surprises you? And what offends you? That last one is often a challenge for me. Sometimes there will be a proverb that, that just doesn't seem right. And, kind of irritates my spirit, or I don't see that in the world, that kind of thing. But, it's not that I'm offended, like, oh, that's awful. I can't believe Solomon wrote that. Not really like that. It's just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Looks like we lost Robbie there somehow. Anyways, what's your opinion? Which one of these proverbs speaks to you, or puzzles, surprise, offends, or that you just want to talk about?
This is very interesting. Like here it says, the house of the righteous has great wealth, but the income of the wicked brings trouble. God allows us, even if we're just awful, troublesome, wicked people, to still become wealthy and rich and get all this stuff.
Hmm.
But guess what? That doesn't mean that it's going to turn out the way that you thought. And so I'm seeing like the wealth isn't what you think it is. Like we're not rich people, but my children always say, "Mommy, we're the richest people on our block
Hmm.
because we have Yeshua."
Yeah.
And it's the sweetest thing in the world. But there's people on our block that have a lot more money than we do, and I see trouble.
Oh, yeah.
He'll let
There are
people have
definitely
money,
different kinds of wealth.
houses, cars, wealth, women. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you're wealthy.
Yeah. If you've got community, if you have healthy relationships, especially within your own house, there's no value you can put on that. I'd love to be rich, but I would much rather have a good relationship with my wife than $1 billion. There's just no comparison.
The one that really touched me and that kept coming along is a gentle tongue is the tree of life.
Hmm.
That's verse 4. And then a hot tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. And an example was today while I was working at the coffee shop, I got an email from a coworker pretty much giving it to me in an email saying that next time I send an email demanding for something that I have to do my due diligence. And it triggered me and my blood pressure was starting to rise.
Hmm.
And thankfully the father kind of tapped me on my shoulder and just said, "Hey, calm down. You've been through this before. Don't let it get the best out of you." And I just humbled myself, honestly, and just went back and said, "I didn't mean to demand anything. I apologize. I'll look back at what I'm doing wrong and, we'll go from there." I said, "But my
Hmm.
intent was never to be demanding." And I wasn't demanding at all. Not at any point in the email was I saying, "You need to do this now." I was just informing that this is the actions that I was going to take, and I was asking for assistance, but I wasn't demanding for them to do anything at any point. So as soon as I sent that email, I got a message in Teams, and it was another guy that was in that email, and he sent me a message saying, "Hey, listen, this person is dealing with a lot of back pain right now, so they're a little bit on edge right now." And my reply was, "I understand, no worries. I know that there's a lot of stress and pressure going on at work right now." I said, "But I appreciate you letting me know, and I hope that she feels better soon."
Hmm.
If somebody came to my rescue at least to make me feel better, that, "Hey man, it's really not you. It's just that person is going through some back pain and that's coming across." And then a few minutes after that, that person sent me an email and tells me, because I said I apologize, and they come back and say, "Oh, I'll forgive you." And I know this
Hmm.
person. This person is actually a really nice person. It's always been nice to me. I've always been nice to this person and no issues at all. And this is the first time. So I was actually surprised. So instead of me going back and being mean and saying whatever, something mean like, "Well, that's not what I was trying to do. I don't know what's your problem, blah, blah, blah." I didn't even say that. I just ate it. And I apologize myself. There is something about over apologizing, and that's for another
Hmm.
conversation, right? But I did say, "Hey, look, my apologies. I didn't mean to come across that way." And that tempered everything, brought everything down. So instead of me escalating those things, that's not my nature. But after years of being an introvert and people just constantly giving it to you for years, eventually you start defending yourself and it comes out the wrong way. This has helped me. The Proverbs has helped me tremendously in calming down, because I'm not a tempered person. At least I don't see myself at that. But
Hmm.
when you're an introvert, again, for those of you who are introverts, you just stay quiet most of the time and don't say anything. So you turn the other cheek plenty of times and you get tired of it eventually and you become defensive and it comes out the wrong way. So as believers, we have to, wherever we at, including our workplace, because we spend, I don't know what's the ratio, the percentage, but like 80% of our time, we spend at the workplace instead of our families. That's a great place to show how he has worked in our lives. And
Yeah.
sometimes is by eating it, just by taking it in the chin over and over again. Now, it doesn't mean that, and I want to be clear, doesn't mean that you got to take it forever. At some point, you got to defend yourself, but it has to be in the right way. But that definitely spoke to me today as I read this and went through that situation.
Yeah, that's good. That connects down to verse 28, where it says, the heart of the righteous ponders how to answer. And the word for there isn't, I don't think it's tzaddik. Oh, yeah, it is tzaddik. Never mind. I don't understand the Hebrew well enough to comment on that. But the intent here seems to be that a righteous person doesn't just say what comes to mind. He takes some time to think about it. And what would have happened if you had just instantly replied to her email and, said, hey, well, don't be so sensitive. I'm just telling you the truth. And it could cause permanent damage to the relationship, and you may never be able to work together the same way that you could before that point. And just because you went with your gut instead of thinking about it and saying, what's really happening here? And just the act of waiting gives somebody else time to step in and give you a heads up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Verse 23, there's another one. To make an apt answer is a joy to a man. And answer implies a response. So somebody has said something to you or asked a question. And I think, let me see, Young's literal. Yeah, there's a verse in here, and I'm just not remembering which verse, but it actually says a wise man in the ESV. But the word for wise is actually talking about a prudent man, someone who considers what he's saying before he says it.
Well, and I also noticed something about that too, not to interrupt too much, but part of that, like with my husband, there's a time and a place to say certain things with him. Like he just got home from work. Am I bothering him? No, he's playing with his 6-year-old daughter. I'm over here for a minute. I got my kiss. I'm going to walk away because the guy just got home. Or like sometimes you need to be careful how much of something you say at once. Because like he always says, men put things in boxes. You got to stay in one box. Let me process it. Don't keep putting things with your girl spaghetti brain and try to connect everything right now. Let me put one thing at a time. Because everything's got to be in its season, in its place. You got to be prudent with your information because I can't do the thing like you do with everything sparking all like this because we're different. And so
he's not an engineer.
That's how it read for me.
Yeah, that is true. I think that's probably true for everybody to an extent that, it's not necessarily just men, but, if you come at somebody with too much information too quickly or too many complaints, let me deal with this first one before we get to the next one. The stress levels keep going up and up and up until you can't deal with it anymore, and then you explode, and that doesn't help anybody. All right, so back to our 4 questions. I had one that I thought was a little bit puzzling, and that's verse 24. The path of life leads upward for the prudent, that he may turn away from Sheol beneath. My first thought here is that, I know people who are not believers who are prudent. That, they're very considered in what they say. They don't try to offend people. They try to give consideration to other people. Those are all aspects of being prudent. So how does prudence keep a person out of hell? Then when I thought about it some more, I realized it's not talking about hell. Sheol is not hell. Sheol is the grave. It's saying a prudent man keeps himself alive. Prudence will protect you. You don't say things that offend the wrong people because that could get you killed or at least hurt. So the path of life leads upward for the prudent because it keeps them out of the grave. It just took me a while to process that.
Yeah, I also think we've heard the hell on earth. And you can feel at times where death is just better than the life you're living. Because it's so stressful, it's so overwhelming that you feel like, hey, this is hell right now. And it pays to be prudent here on earth. Like, yeah, if you're prudent now, you're not going to die because you were prudent. But also, if you're a prudent man, you'll find more peace and joy in now, where you're at now, than not being prudent.
Okay, you can all think about the 4 questions. I'm just going to go up to the top of the chapter. We talked a little bit about the soft and the harsh words here. Yeah, it's definitely true in the workplace, and it's especially important with people that you have an ongoing relationship with. that you think about, how is what I'm going to say going to impact this relationship tomorrow or next week or next year? Just having to pause to think about what you're saying really increases the chances that you're going to say something prudent and wise instead of just like letting your gut speak for you. Because the gut doesn't have a whole lot of brains. Paul is a dietitian, and she has taught me that your guts actually do have brains, but they're not the conscious kind that can give you wisdom. They're the kind that help you react, which there's a time and a place for just an instant reaction. But you normally don't want that with your words when you're dealing with people that you love or that you want to have an ongoing relationship with. There are multiple examples of both of these in Scripture. One is Jacob and Esau. When Jacob was returning to the promised land after he had been with Laban, he heard that Esau was coming to meet him with an armed party of like 400 men. He's got himself and his wives and his children and all of his livestock. And I'm sure he had a lot of men with him too to help with all that livestock. But he didn't have an army. And he was afraid that Esau was coming to kill him. So he divided up all of his possessions and he sent gift after gift ahead of him to Esau. So that a little gift, okay, that's great, but I'm still coming to kill you. And then there's another little gift, and then another one, and another one. And all of these repeated good deeds have a cumulative effect that's much greater than if he had just given everything to Esau. If he had just sent everything he had to Esau, Esau would say, you can't bribe me out of this. I'm coming to hurt you. But instead, he softens Esau's heart bit by bit over time by repeated gentle answers of a kind. Another one is very similar, is Abigail and David. David and his men had been patrolling the borders of Israel and protecting the ranchers. And they were providing David and his men with sustenance during that time, giving them food, sometimes shelter probably. Otherwise, they would have to go and raid enemy territory for food, which they also did sometimes. But because Abigail's husband, Nadav, I believe his name was, he had benefited. He was a very wealthy man, and he had benefited extensively from David's guarding his borders. And so David was coming to him to say, hey, what did you have to contribute to our efforts here? And Nadav said, I'm not giving you anything. I don't owe you anything. I didn't ask you to come and guard my land. And so David's like, oh, that's right. You didn't. So let me come and take it from you because you didn't ask us to guard it. He was going to go kill Nadav. And Abigail heard about it. One of her servants came and told her, and Nadav was he was an awful man. But Abigail still loved her family, even though she knew her husband was an evil man. She still wanted to protect him, and especially her children. So she went out to David, and she brought way more than David had expected. She brought date cakes and bread and all kinds of gifts for him and begged him, please don't hurt my family. And because of it, Nadav actually died, I think, the next day. He got drunk that night and died of an aneurysm or something the next morning. But Abigail became queen because of this. And all her children lived. And they inherited from Nadav. Her future children inherited from the king himself. She clearly got a lot out of this. And David became a better man for it because he repented from his vengeance, wanting to kill Nadav just for pettiness. Pettiness is a terrible thing, but it's not something that you get to kill people over. Think about David and Goliath. When Goliath was out there provoking Israel, but they were all too scared of him. When David showed up, probably a teenager, and he went out to fight Goliath, he starts provoking Goliath, saying, you're coming at me with a sword and spear, but I'm coming at you with the power of the God of Israel. Goliath has no respect for the God of Israel. So he's like, well, that's just stupid. What does this mean? How can you defeat me? And I've been making a fool out of you and your God for a month now. And so he just dismissed David as not a threat. And then comes this stone and down goes Goliath. And it's David's taunting of Goliath caused him to overreact. And that's an example of a harsh word stirring up wrath, but actually with a good result. David knew how Goliath would respond to that. Another one with not such a good result is in the book of Judges. There was I think there were lots of attacks from foreigners, and I don't remember the exact circumstances of this one, but a foreign group, Moabites or somebody, had been attacking the tribes in Jephthah. He had raised an army and went out to fight them, but he didn't invite the tribe of Ephraim to join him. And, there were a lot of rivalries between Ephraim and especially Judah. So then the tribe of Ephraim came to him and said, hey, we're Israel too. Why don't you include us in this? Because there were spoils of war and there was glory and all kinds of things. And he said, let me pull it up just so I know exactly what he said. This is in Judges 12. Oops, I went to Jude instead of Judges. Judges 12. Oh, it was the Ammonites. So why did you cross over and fight the Ammonites and not call us to join you? So he said, last time I called you, you didn't answer me. So why would I do it this time? I can't trust you. So I took my life in my own hand and crossed over to fight them. And this caused a civil war because he told the truth. I mean, he didn't say anything that was wrong. He had called the Ephraimites to help him in the past and they didn't show up, and he had to fight for his own life without their help. So he wasn't going to depend on them again. But because he said, I didn't call you because you guys are not dependable, they didn't react well to that, and it started a civil war in Israel. That's the famous story of the Shibboleth thing. Like, when the Ephraimites are crossing the river, you can tell which one is an Ephraimite because he can't pronounce Shibboleth correctly. Just some examples of the soft answer and a harsh answer and the kind of effect and how that can actually be used to enhance relationships and even to provoke somebody into doing something that you want them to do that might not be so good for them. Might not be so good for you either, unfortunately.
Wouldn't say it's offended, but it feels offended. I feel offended, but I don't want to when it talks.
Okay.
A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Because I'm a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to be nice sometimes. When you get a 6-year-old who's super emotional little girl and a boy who just wants to be inappropriate and is 9 years old all the time. And it's really hard to be kind. And when I can bring myself to just do it, this comes into my mind constantly. And my mom's too, because my mom's around too. My stepmom's here. And it's just, we all have to remember this. It works. Not every time perfectly right now, but if it's slowly little building blocks, they become used to it and they realize, well, I better listen while mom's nice. But then it becomes easier for everybody.
Yeah.
And now it's easier now because I have made the decision to have a more gentle way of parenting.
Yeah, and I think the more people in the household and the more complicated the relationships, the more important it becomes, even to tiptoe around people at times. I mean, you can't do that all the time because that just causes strife of its own. You do have to be careful that you're not going to say something that's going to be taken the wrong way or in the wrong spirit, or that you're not speaking out just in anger.
Well, you don't want to turn your children to anger because there's some stuff. You don't want to bring your children up in a way that's going to turn them against you and turn them into the thing you're trying to avoid in the whole first place. So part of that starts with the 6-year-old's emotional, and I have to work on this whole, okay, I have to be, because it's so hard sometimes to just have a gentle word when it just isn't working.
Yeah, there was something that Heidi said a few weeks ago, that one of the goals of a parent is to make sure that you can like your children, that you can enjoy being in their presence.
Jenny.
That's right. Yeah. That if you are raising children in such a way that they're becoming somebody that you don't want to be around, it's going to be much harder to raise them. And then what about your grandkids? Do you want to be with your grandkids? How can you be with your grandkids if you can't get along with your kids?
Yep, that's right. And I do love being around my children. They're wonderful people. It's easier now. Tell you what, you got to start and you got to stay that way. Sometimes when you get really frustrated, you got to stop and be like, gentle. But it works better. You just got to get through that feeling, that gentle.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some variation between children too. Some of them need a harsher word than others. Well, I will tell you one that kind of offended me in the way that it just rubbed me the wrong way at first. That's verse 25. It seems like I already said that, but the Lord tears down the house of the proud, but maintains the widow's boundaries. Yeah, I know of examples of this kind of thing from Scripture. You think of the widow with the jars of oil, that her family was being oppressed. Her husband had owed money, and he couldn't pay it, and then he died. And so his creditor was coming after her and her children. And so I think it was Elisha who came along and said, borrow all the jars from your neighbors, and started pouring oil and filled up all these jars with oil. And, she sold the oil and paid off her husband's debt. So here was God divinely intervening in a situation to protect this widow's boundaries, her family, and the inheritance that her husband had left for her. In this case, though, we don't know anything about what happened to her oppressor. We know he was paid back for the loan, but did anything happen to him after that? I have no idea. But we can point at people like Ahab and say, King Ahab was an evil man, and God wiped out his descendants from the earth. None of them are alive today. Same thing with many of the Canaanite peoples, entire cities completely wiped out. Not because God was wanting to punish children or anything like that, but because he needed to end that line so that those people couldn't pass on whatever their inheritance was to anybody. They were evil people. Like, think of the Sodomites. These are Canaanites who were extremely hostile to visitors and outsiders. So God put an end to it. But the thing that offends me is that it's not the rule. That's kind of the exception, or at least it seems to be from our perspective. It seems to be the exception because we see people who are taken advantage of and oppressed all the time. And we see entire systems that are built to keep people in oppression. I mean, the Hebrews weren't slaves for 400 years straight. They were slaves for a big portion of that, but they were oppressed and abused by the people where they lived for 400 years. Eventually, God destroyed the house of the Pharaoh who was oppressing them at the end, and probably the ones from before that too, because there were intervening dynasties. But Egypt is still a country today, and there are still widows and poor and sick people who are constantly having to struggle and constantly having to deal with people taking advantage of them. The only way that I can think to reconcile this with passages like this is that God balances the scales in the end. We may not see it. There might be misery in the oppressor's house. There might be peace in the oppressed house. The balance, or the scales, might be balanced after death, after the resurrection and judgment. I don't know. Just have to trust that God knows what he's doing and he's got a plan. I just wish we could see it. Hey, Carlos, you got your hand up?
I do. I was going to start using that option there. I think it helps out. But yeah, that's a good thing you said about the whole that he killed Canaanites and he killed a group of people, and that's because he had to cut off that group of people, right? And for many years, I would hear the atheists say that, like, how can your God kill innocent people? And I didn't have an answer for that because I didn't read the scripture, so I had no idea. But now that I understood what the Canaanites were doing, they were sacrificing children, they were doing evil things, they were worshiping other gods. So I'm like, well, of course he would allow those evil people to die. And then they will go back and say, well, what about grace and what about mercy and all this other stuff? And I said, well, they're so far off already, all the way to the left, to where their heart has just been given completely to evil, that at that point he has no choice. And that's an element that I think people understand, that because they say, well, what about even the children? And I think that's a concept that is hard to understand sometimes, but I guess it all depends. So it reminds me of Godfather 1, where Don Chicho killed the father, and then he had two boys, and then he killed the older boy. And then the mother was like, all I have left is, Corleone, right? The youngest one. So she went to Don Chicho and like plead for him to let him go. And, it was a good plea. She was like, look, he's all I have. Look, he's a little slow. He's weak. He's never going to come back and do anything. But Don Chicho understood the principle that if he didn't kill that boy was going to come back for revenge regardless. And guess what happened? That kid got away. And many years later, he did come back and he did kill him. It's just part of the human nature. And the father knows that in all his wisdom. That's why he had to cut it right there and then. So it sounds offensive, but when we have our apologetics straight and we tell non-believers that, listen, those people that God allowed his people to kill, you got to understand they were already evil people. They were already murdering their own children, right? At the altar of Moloch, right? They were already doing horrible things already. So it's not like it was a good group of people. And then God said, yeah, I know those people are okay, but these are my people. So you can go ahead and get them. So to me, that was very offensive back when I didn't understand that, because I was like, yeah, you're right. Now, obviously, I knew that God was just, and I was like, there has to be an explanation. I just didn't know it at the time. But if I may add too, I looked at 15 and it says, all the days of the afflicted are evil, but the cheerful of heart has a continual feast. And that, I won't say that it offends me, but it triggers me, because I'm not always cheerful all the time. Like, I'm going to allow myself not to be cheerful for a little bit because it makes me feel good for that moment. And I remember when I would get mad at somebody for a week. You'll never see it. You'll never notice it. But I will be mad on my own, in my own internally for a week. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't be mad at this. I wouldn't do anything to that person. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't treat him any differently. But in my heart, it was eating me alive. And it was wrong. So I was like, I can't do this. So here I am, all proud of myself years later. And I was like, okay, well, I'm only going to allow myself to be mad for 24 hours. And after that, I'm going to let it go. And I remember I was talking to one of the supervisors we had at work, and I tell him the story, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm all proud. It's like, oh, I only allow myself to stay mad for 24 hours. And he looked at me, he's like, 24 hours? He's like, man, that's 24 hours too long. And I kind of stopped and looked at him, and I was like, you know what, man, you are right. That is way too long. Even a day is way too long to be mad at anything or anybody, because life's too short for that. But it triggers me because, I don't always have a cheerful heart, and I want to, and I understand it has a continual feast, and I see other people that are cheerful, and I'm like, man, not with covetousness, right? But like, man, I want to be that happy like they are, and I'm not always like that. So that triggers me.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see what you're saying.
Hey.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought on any particular proverb in here that might offend you or rub you the wrong way? Or maybe it makes you think, oh, that's talking about me. All right, well, we can move on from that one. Oh, verse 3, I thought was, the eyes of Yahweh are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. People plot and scheme as if they think nobody will ever know. And I realize that, most of those people really don't believe that anybody will ever know. They don't believe that there's a God. They don't believe anybody is watching. But even believers do this. I found myself doing it, thinking about how can I get my way in this? I think that we probably all we have moments where we think that we know that we're doing something wrong, but nobody knows. So it's not that big of a deal. Maybe we think we're not hurting anybody, but God is always there. He is aware of everything. And it's hard to feel that sometimes because you can't see God standing there. You can't see his eye on you. But, the more time you spend in God's word, I think the easier it is to know that he's there, even when you can't see him. But there will always be that, psychological disconnect between what we know at some level to be true and what we can know at a gut level to be true because we can't see it. Can't remember who it was. Someone came to Jesus and asked for prayer. I wish I could remember who that was right now. And he said, Jesus asked him, do you believe that God can do this? And he says, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Because we all believe and disbelieve at the same time. All right. So what's another one that really speaks to you out of these proverbs? Not under any obligation, but Kenneth, you're awfully quiet. Is there any of these proverbs that really stand out to you?
No, not. They seem pretty much like they're repeating the same idea, over and over. How does your Bible say that? How did you read that? This one says, fear of the Lord teaches wisdom. Humility precedes honor. So it's the fear of the Lord teaches. I believe in everything. I love God, but I don't seem to feel like I have fear. I don't understand sometimes when it says fear, when the only ones that need to fear are the ones that haven't accepted Christ.
Well, certainly that's true about fearing God's condemnation. But there's this idea of when you really know who you are in relation to God, that God is so all-powerful, so immense. And we are, I mean, he's infinite. And what are we compared to God? And yet he still sees us and cares about what's happening in our lives. And I think the fear of the Lord that Scripture talks about, it's a terror to the wicked, but it's an awful reverence to those who love God and want to please him. And it's this awe of God, just the immensity that I think it's really talking about. In this translation, the English Standard is what I've got here. I mean, that's really close to what you've got. It essentially says the same thing. But this word for instruction.
Yeah, this says essentially the same as, well, as in almost any good translation. But when you're reading yours and I'm reading mine, it's got different words.
Yeah.
But it's saying,
well, they all have different, every translation is going to have differences, especially in the poetic books like Proverbs and Psalms that apparently it's pretty difficult to translate. I don't know enough Hebrew to tell you, but I do know this word for instruction is musar. And there's a fairly modern, from the late Middle Ages, Jewish discipline of essentially self-improvement called musar. And the way that it's been described to me is that there are these various characteristics, and I think there are 12 of them. And these are the characteristics of a perfectly righteous person. And you evaluate yourself on each characteristic and you say, am I too far this way or am I too far this way? And then you try to correct yourself. And this word musar actually is talking about correction. It doesn't just mean instruction. It means correction of something wrong. The fear of the Lord is a realignment of wisdom. It's with these 12 different characteristics, as you get yourself more into the middle of where God wants you to be, you think of each characteristic as a window. And, our job is to shine God's light into the world. But if our windows are not lined up, the light is blocked somewhere. And the more we get our own character in alignment with God's, the more of his light shines through us into the world. If you work through these 12 characteristics, and with you take each one in turn and you work on this one for a while. And then you're not looking for perfection. You're just looking for a little correction. Then you move on to the next one and you work on this one a little while, have a little course correction, and then you move on to the next one. And when you get through all 12, then you go back to the beginning and start on that first one again until eventually, you're centered on each of these characteristics of a righteous person so that the world can see God through you. The word instruction, it's good, but it doesn't really give the best meaning here. It really seems to me that focusing on the chastisement or the correction of a wrong would give a better meaning to this verse. Because if we really fear God, if we have that awe of him, that we want to be in his good graces. You can love your king, but if you know that he has life or death power over you with a single word, you want to be in alignment with his will. You don't want to be off doing your own thing. You want to be doing what he wants you to do. And the more that we get those corrections, those course corrections, and bring our own lives in alignment with God's expectations and how he sees the world, the better we're going to be. And I think that the second half of the verse, humility, is really the key. Because when you know who you are in relationship to God, you can't help but be humble. I mean, if you are proud, if you see, if you really understand who God is and you're still proud and say, I don't really need that, I can still do things my own way, then you still don't understand who God is. And you're not going to get that correction. You're not really going to be willing and open to God's course corrections until you get who God is.
I used to that one used to be like, how can you fear God? Because I think in our culture, when we see fear, we automatically think, well, that's not good. You shouldn't be fearing something. But as I thought about it and try to work through it, I try to think about thankfully, I have a good earthly father. And I remember as a kid, both fearing my dad. Now that I think about it, I feared my father and I love my father at the same time. Because a lot of the times that I didn't get into trouble, it wasn't necessarily because I was thinking of honoring my father, right? Like, oh man, I'm not going to skip school because I'm going to put shame on my father. That was not what was going through my mind. It was like, I'm not going to skip school because I fear my father and the consequences of those things. But that doesn't mean that I dislike the man or hated him in any way, shape, or form. If anything, now that I'm older, it made me understand how much I love him even more now, because I understood that his instructions were there to keep me safe. His instructions were there to show how he loves me, because he loves me enough where he doesn't want me to get into trouble or any of these things. So when I get into verses like this, where I'm like, where it doesn't make any sense, I put myself in a father-son relationship with my dad. And I did fear my dad, but it's a good, healthy fear. What I call it, it's a good, healthy fear, because it keeps me out of trouble. So that's the way I've seen it, and that's why it helps me understand that. AJ, doesn't instruction, though, doesn't Torah means instruction? So in this case, that's not the exact definition for that?
Yeah, this word isn't Torah, it's the Musar. But yeah, Torah essentially does mean instruction.
Okay.
It's a little different from this one because instruction can be hypothetical. It could be like, if you ever encounter this situation, here's what you should do. Whereas Musar is, you're doing this wrong, you need to straighten up. So they're very close. So what about surprises? Anything surprise anybody in this chapter? I'll start off here just to prime the pump, so to speak. I kind of hint at this in this subtitle on the slide, the joy of wisdom and sorrow of foolishness. But there are multiple verses starting in, I think, verse 13, maybe verse 12 might fit in here too. But these verses are talking about how wisdom and how associating with wise people can have an immediate and tangible impact in your life, and just how happy you are. When I realize happiness isn't necessarily tangible. But it starts off with a glad heart makes a cheerful face, but by sorrow of heart, the spirit is crushed. Seems kind of like a tautology, like, well, of course, glad heart makes a cheerful face. When you're glad, you smile, right? But this is actually contrasting the extent to which an emotional state impacts your whole being, the whole soul. A glad heart comes out in the world in the form of physical and verbal expressions, the way that you speak to people, the way that you interact with people. And a sorrowful heart, if there's sorrow like down inside, it cuts inwardly. It's not just, whether you're cheerful or sorrowful, all of that impacts the way that you interact with the world. But that sorrow it feeds on itself. And it cuts inwardly and creates bad relationships, which then hurts you more. And this beats you down. And even those things, even down inside of you, which could not normally be hurt by the people or the circumstances around you, will be injured by just continual affliction, whether that's illness or whatever. But then these verses go on, and each one kind of builds on the other. They seem to be saying very similar things. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feed on folly. Well, the one who has understanding, seeking knowledge, he's getting joy out of seeking knowledge and gaining more wisdom. And this adds to his overall well-being, and he becomes a happier person. Whereas the fool is feeding on folly. He's bringing more foolishness into his life. Just like sorrow begets sorrow, joy begets joy, foolishness begets foolishness. All of these things are positive feedback.
This reminds me of when we were learning, because we go to a Torah fellowship sometimes about 40 miles away from us, and we were talking about this, and I remember that when we were talking about verse 30, bright eyes bring joy to the heart, good news gives health to the bones. It's like that. And I didn't get that. So I'm surprised because I'm getting it. Like when your wife walks up to you like this, and then turns and her girlfriend calls and you're like, hey babe, what's up? Latter-day Blood. And then she's looking at you like this and you're like, The whole difference, bright eyes. Like when you're trying to bring up someone, it brings joy to the heart. When even the way you look, when we were learning our marriage, we were doing in our women's group, we were talking about how we speak to our husbands or the men in our lives, our sons, our coworkers, whomever, but mostly our partners. Do you, before a major thing, even that you're upset or frustrated or concerned or afraid about, you're not sure, look in the mirror and look at the way that, just say it how you were going to say it and watch yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Watch your eyes.
That's a good idea.
Because the light in your eyes, or is it darkness?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to bring love, joy? Is it going to bring good news, health to the bones? Or is it going to completely bring sorrow? So that kind of made me realize kind of how that made me get that first.
Yeah, that is good, because the way that we look and interact with other people brings either sorrow or joy to them. And even if there's turmoil in you, if you try not to put that out into the world or to people around you, those people are going to be happier, which is going to help you be happier too. And then there's also, mentioning mirror made me think that there's also kind of a reflexive mechanism going on here too. If you think of the idea of the light of the eyes being how you see the world, if you choose to see the world through more positive lenses, if you choose to look for the good in other people instead of looking for the negative, instead of being critical, when you feel like, I know this guy's screwing up, try to rethink it to say, what's he doing right? Is there anything that I can praise him for? And you're just not going to be as miserable. You are going to make yourself happier. Not just because you're making him happier and that makes your relationship better, but just because now you've got a better outlook on the world and you're not making yourself as miserable. I had a fellowship I was at Colorado years ago. The pastor's wife would always illustrate this kind of thing by saying, whenever somebody whips past her or cuts her off on the highway, she tries to imagine what terrible or urgent mission this person is on. Somebody's hurt. They're trying to get to the hospital. He's late for his own wedding. There's some really good reason for this guy to be behaving in this obnoxious manner. And, it's probably not true. Some people are just obnoxious. But, at least it makes you feel better, even if he never sees it. Was that a goose frub off I saw there, Sarah?
It was kind of a let it roll off. Like, yeah, you feel it, but instead of internalizing it, you can let it roll off. You can just pray, say a quick little, I wish the best for you. I pray the best for you. Let it roll off. Because sometimes that's the only thing you can do. Process through prayer rather than getting angry.
Okay. So are there any others that really speak to you, that stand out?
I was looking at verse 17 and 18, and I thought it was kind of funny because better is a portion of vegetables where there is love than a fattened ox served with hatred.
Oh, I like that.
I love the idea of food being brought into this picture. It's obvious that a fattened ox is better than vegetables. And of course, this makes me kind of laugh because there's such an agenda on the vegan left right now, but not because vegetables aren't good, but because obviously people prefer them. And so this idea of better is a portion of vegetables where there is love, meaning not everybody wants to eat their vegetables, but when served with love, that's a good thing. And it is better than a fattened ox served with hatred. That's kind of cool. But then the next verse, it goes into a hot-tempered person stirs up strife. And I thought it was funny that it's almost like it's these kind of cooking analogies, like serving and then stirring. So there's some kind of connection there, apparently, just making kind of almost a thematic kind of connection at a different level. And then this is where the person's hot-tempered, they're stirring up strife. So I just thought that was funny.
No, I think that's wonderful. How did I not even notice that? You're good. I got to meet you one day, man.
That is interesting. I don't think I would have looked at it that way, but yeah. Here's a fun one too, verse 19. Way of a sluggard is like a hedge of thorns, but the path of the upright is a level highway. I know that any of us who have had teenagers have had times when it's impossible to get them to do anything. And even though you know that what you want them to do is for their own good, they just sit there. And it is like you can't get ahead in life if you're not actually moving. And so the sluggard is like a hedge of thorns because he just sits there and gets in the way. in trying to work your way through this. If you've got, say, you've got a project to work on, and you've got somebody who just refuses to pull their weight, it's like you can't just leave them. You got to drag them along with you. You got to make sure that somebody's getting this work done. And so it's like trying to hack your way through hedges instead of sticking to the path. Whereas if you've got a team full of people who are willing to work and they want to get to it and learn things and accomplish things, everything just goes. Okay, any other verses? Nothing in particular?
I was looking at 22.
Mm-hmm.
I really like this one. Without consultation, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they succeed. So just the idea of taking input from other people, asking and seeking input from other people, especially, can obviously help your plans to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So seeking wise counsel is important if you're trying to succeed at anything. Going it alone is not really always as successful. A lot of people who talk about success in life, in the world, there's a saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. Mm-hmm. And that has a lot to do with like how people succeed. And most people who have succeeded in any way have usually done so because of not just their own, like doing it on their own. Like people like to talk about being self-made and that kind of thing if they're really proud. But the reality is that nobody's self-made because somebody's always helping somebody along
Mm-hmm.
the way. So like wise people, instead of just like waiting for others to help them along the way, they seek out other people, like people who are even, irritating sometimes in the way of asking for help from like a lot of people who are really go-getters sometimes ask a lot of people for stuff. But the reality is that they know that input from other people and wise counsel is really important. And sometimes they just want something, but ultimately just this idea of like, it's probably good to err on the side of like just asking for more counsel. It's not a bad idea.
Sarah.
Yeah, within real estate, we have to make sure you get as many eyes as possible on the form before you sign it.
But, in context in this chapter, it's not just, you can't just ask advice from anybody because, it talks about how fools will lead you astray and fools get in the way. But how do you figure out where do you find good counsel? How do you know who to ask?
Well, it depends on what you're doing. Obviously, if you're trying to accomplish something in a particular area, the first thing I would think is like, you're going to go to somebody who's done what you are trying to do or who has done something like what you're trying to do. Like whether you're looking for a mentor or you're looking for somebody to help you figure out the path or whatever, you're actually going to start maybe with that kind of perspective. But then obviously you're going to try to see like, not only have they done it before, but like, were they totally successful and be able to see like what their faults were. You obviously have to know people. You have to at least know their reputation and there's certain criteria, but obviously you'd have to know that the criteria or the character of that person displays some kind of wisdom.
Yeah, I would think you'd probably have to know something about where they came from too.
Yeah.
Look for advice on business. And you don't go to somebody necessarily who is successful in business. You go to someone who has become successful in business, who started out relatively where you are and gotten to where you want to be. If you want to get healthy, you don't go to somebody who's never been sick. You go to somebody who has gotten healthy and apply that to whatever arena.
Exciting for me. I also think that if we put ourselves in the company as a rule of like wise counsel, like we are careful who we choose as friends, who the people we spend the most time with, and do the research and figuring out who these people are. And then we can, over our lives, make sure we collect the right people around us. It not only helps and serves us, it helps and serves them, our children, their children. And in the end, it's a whole like community, and we can all be each other's wise counsel if we all turn to the right counsel, we can all become that for someone else as well.
Yeah, there's
Good point.
verse that was mentioned, actually the very next verse, 23. To make an apt answer is a joy to a man. So you listen to wise counsel, and then you are able to give good counsel, and you get joy yourself out of being able to do that.